Yesterday at the church leaders seminar, I read a headline to you all at the beginning of the Q&A time, so I'm going to read another headline for you. Here it is. Is it possible to raise your child entirely without gender from birth? Meet the parents raising they-bees. Not babies, they-bees. And so the question is, 20-some years ago, it was the GQ BLT community saying, no, we just want civil unions. And they got civil unions. And they said, no, we never want marriage. And then there's marriage. The very next thing is the transgender, gender-bending thing. So I just want to ask, as you look forward, what's next? What's the hill that right now we need to be prepared to defend?
Triangles have three sides. I'm serious.
Maybe we're going towards a culture which totally denies gender entirely, and that affirming gender would be a political no-no. That we should keep that quiet to ourselves, and that we may not talk about ourselves as males or females. I wonder if that's the next hill to which we need to be aware, especially since the radical feminists say that all gender is simply culturally created. It has no meaning in true existence. We may find ourselves in a world that won't allow us to make any statements about gender.
I don't know, this is not exactly an answer to your question, but I mean, I think it's riffing off of Doug's point is that triangles have three sides, but it's it really is a kind of 1984 thing going on where this is justice, this is freedom, this enslavement is freedom. So that's just a redefinition of all these things. So no, shut up, that is freedom. But I don't feel free. No, you're free, shut up. Right? Do exactly what we say and you're free. But it's a very thinly, all the multiculturalism, appreciate diversity stuff, one of the things we have to recognize is they don't appreciate diversity at all. It's skin deep, that's it. It's all a thin veneer for a power play. They want everybody to be cowering, saying, you're right, I don't know how to be nice, I don't know how to love, and then as soon as you cower, they say, and we will teach you how. It's an enslavement move, and then they call that liberty. This is how you be free. And so it is three, triangles have three sides sort of applied across the board, but I think what we have to recognize, and it's coming down now, is that it's quickly going to be, it's not just, first they mock you, then they shame you, then they throw you in jail. So, we're somewhere between the shaming and the prison time.
I would just add that the goal, I think, is ultimately it's transcending our humanity. This androgynous ideal, the attempt to create a distinction-free, neither male nor female human being is an abstract idea where I mentioned just in passing this morning transhumanism or posthumanism, where man merges with his own technology. And all of these operations that even Doug referred to, by plastic surgeons and so forth, are all manipulating, messing with the image of God through technology in an attempt to create a new human being. Now, to my mind, a culture that chops up babies in the womb and sells their parts, executes the elderly, destroys the family, tries to engineer a new human being, is a culture of death. It has no future. So what we have to be preparing for is how do we rebuild culture in the rubble of what's left when they've finished. As long as Islam, in the meantime, does not take over, because in Europe, the Muslims have said, well, we've already won, because numerically, within 50 years, they will be the dominant.
Europe's been colonized.
Precisely. They're just breeding us out of the of the cultural situation. So history will have its own vengeance on this whole issue, not an impersonal history, God-governed history.
And to riff off of the transhumanist thing, the next step in that is robo-sex, virtual reality sex, sex dolls. That's going to be the next battleground there. And to piggyback off of Toby's point, if boys can be girls, if male equals female, then war equals peace, then up equals down, and concentration camp equals summer camp.
So when we look at the New Testament, the book of Acts, there's plenty of court hearings and riots that break out throughout Acts and the New Testament. When we look at the Reformation, we see John Calvin writing the Institutes, primarily giving a defense, hey, King of France, here's what we believe. Luther, of course, nailing the 95 Theses to the door. And now, what advice would you give to a layperson whose maybe pastor or leadership is skittish about getting into the fray of some of those tussles, we might call those tussles, whether denominationally or in the courts, where the prevailing notion, as you were saying, Doug, the concept is the Christian virtue we should all strive for is to be nice, rather than that Christianity is a full contact sport. It's not croquet. How do you help a layperson encourage their pastor or their church leadership to be ready for those battles that we see throughout both biblical history and church history?
The first is to teach people to play croquet the right way, which is a full contact sport.
I think some of the stuff that Doug was just saying about just read the Bible together and I think what you want to see is you want to be in a church community where there's at least that willingness to read the Bible together. We're in such a bad place, and I think we read the Bible and we don't pay attention to anything that it's saying, and we notice the verses that we memorized in Sunday school, and we're skipping over all the other verses. And so we need to be praying that God would just let us actually hear His Word, let us see it for the first time, and we want to be in a community then that is willing to do that with us. And I think if we have that basic conviction that it's the Word of God and we're going to do whatever it says to do, and we're going to obey all of it, that's the key. That's it. And you can move slowly or quickly and work things out in your community so long as there's that foundational commitment. But if you're in a place where you start doing the Bible study and they say, no, that you can't talk like the way the Apostle Paul did, and you can't ever do what Ezekiel did, and you can't do these things, then I think you need to find a new church.
I think in the future, what is crucial is what you folks are doing here at NSA, is training the next generation. It's wonderful to see. I see it in other places. Young people are gutsy when they know the truth. Some of us old people are tired of being, attacked and so on. But I think the future belongs to this rising generation. And if we can train them well, I think that's an element of real hope.
As a pastor myself, I would just add that I get contacted by a lot of younger pastors who are just not sure how to handle everything that's going on. And in fact, many pastors, they were not equipped to deal with these things in the seminary. They weren't trained to do that. They weren't given the tools. They weren't encouraged along that line, and then they find themselves in the pastorate. They've got all of these issues. They don't know how to respond. So try taking out your pastor for lunch and saying, I want to come alongside you and help you and encourage you and be a support to you, and I want to pray for you, and here's some really good resources. Why don't you start there and let's discuss them? Now that won't always be fruitful, but I find especially with younger pastors, that is a fruitful tack, because they weren't prepared very often at all in their seminaries and in their pastors' colleges to be able to engage culturally.
No holy satire classes at seminary.
So flip that question over, and for pastors who maybe their congregation is sort of going, whoa, pastor, you'll ride the brakes on this sort of thing. What advice would you give to a pastor who's saying, I want to rush in, I want to get in the fight, I want to go where the battle's the fiercest, but maybe he's getting pushback from his congregation?
So there's a balance here, because on the one hand, the pastor is a corporal leading troops into battle. On the other hand, the pastor is a shepherd guarding sheep. Right? So the Bible doesn't give us just one metaphor. The Christian church is the household of God. It's the family. The Christian church is the bride of Christ. The Christian church is a flock of sheep. You know, we have many different images. And I would say the first thing a pastor should do, there are many steps in this, but the first thing the pastor should do is practice conflict when he's defending sheep. Don't practice, you shouldn't take the show on the road and, you know, have your sheep not fed, not well equipped, and then you go down the street and start a fight. I would say that you should learn how to fight the way David did. You know, before he fought Goliath, he killed the lion and the bear. He learned how to, he got his chops in fighting defense, right? And that's the shepherd's heart. You don't fight because you love fighting. You know, I want to kill something and wolves will do. You fight because you love sheep. You fight not because you hate wolves. You hate wolves because you love sheep. That's the whole motive. And you want to make sure that everybody understands that. The sheep understand you love them, and that you're going to protect them. If there's any danger, you might not be able to protect them effectively, but they know that you're going to be in between the danger, whatever it is, and the flock. That's how you learn how to do it. And then when you've done that for a while, you learn to anticipate when the bear and the lion are coming, right? And you might want to take preventative action that way. So I would say young pastors, learn how to recognize threats and fight defensively. Learn how to fight defensively first.
Seems to me the great irony, as Doug was pointing out this afternoon, that in spite of the millions of Christians, that this crazy small percentage of people taking over the public discourse and determining the way everybody is supposed to live. That already has happened. I think Nazi Germany was a similar case where you had this ideology that didn't make any sense, but the Christians didn't know how to speak, and it took over. And then for years, the church regretted that it had not done anything. And so you dear people here, please hear this call to step into the breach and make statements. Make statements about truth. And don't be intimidated by this small minority of people who are not making any sense at all.
One of the things, too, to remember is that oftentimes it's that first person saying that the emperor doesn't have any clothes. It's the awkward person, and it's embarrassing and so on, but it takes that and that kind of courage, and then suddenly the next person next to you is like, you're right, I don't see them either. He looks just, you know, naked as a jaybird. But courage engenders courage, and I think that we need to grow that.
That was going to be my point, actually. So good one.
Ditto.
You know, I don't think you can teach courage. You have to model it. People need to be led, and you give others confidence when in leadership you step out and you're courageous. That's when other people say to themselves, I want to be able to do that. I want to be able to walk like that. And I think it needs modeling.
Dr. Jones, could you elaborate? You mentioned the younger generation. Could you just elaborate on that specifically to maybe high school, college-age students? What would be some specific advice for them for going out and engaging the culture, enraging the culture, that sort of thing?
Well, I just happen to believe that the Christian worldview is the most convincing. and that we have the truth on our side. And my bet is that young people, if we talk to them clearly, can be convinced about the truth, and then they're the ones that can take the battle to the enemy. And it's happening all over the place. Joe Boot organizes a group in Great Britain called the Blackstone Fellowship. Oh, sorry. The Wilberforce Academy. Blackstone was an American, that's right. And wonderful, no, wonderful young people with great gifts are being turned on to speak the truth in the British culture. And the Blackstone Fellowship in this country is also doing a similar work among the young people. So I think we need to seek out ways that you folks are finding here in Moscow to capture the imagination of the young people and believe in the truth of the gospel. It is true, and it makes sense, and people can hear it and understand it. And so have confidence that that will work.
A question for Joe Boot and Peter Jones. Someone asked, can you address the Eastern Orthodox understanding of theosis versus what you both discussed about the oneness and two-ness?
Nope.
That's what they get for asking a yes or no question.
Well, theosis, as I understand it, is a form of what's called non-dual spirituality, where we seek to feel like we look within ourselves to find the signs of God within us, and then we can draw close to God and be empowered in our spirituality. And those of you who heard my lecture yesterday, that is a perfect form of oneism, where God is not the God within. The God that we worship is God outside of us, who is not dependent upon us, who created us. And it's dangerous to play around with these kinds of spiritualities that actually undermine the distinctions in creation and the great distinction between God and the creation.
Question for Toby on how to engage on social media, this wonderful new platform and technology that's landed on our 21st century lap. How to engage in that sort of new public square in a non-cowardly way without wasting lots of time being a keyboard warrior. Seems like there's sort of two ditches there. Any general guidelines for how to engage there?
Right. I love that comic with the guy, the wife is calling him and he says, 5 more minutes, there's somebody wrong on the internet.
Right.
Yeah, I think we have a lot to learn, and so I would say this is new, and I think we need to go in with the right kind of humility, recognizing that we are figuring this out. And so, we need to say that, and we need to pray about it, and we need to be thinking about it, and we need to be getting input and feedback as we go in. But I think it's something new, just like the printing press was something new. The printing, now when the printing press first started going, I mean, many of the same kind of dynamics, and you got all these pamphlets and these tracts going, and so on, and people were having to figure out, how do we handle this? How do we do this? And so I think we need to think, Christians need to think, God is giving us social media. It's not a curse. I think God is giving this to us. He's giving us the ability to connect with people all over the world, proclaim the gospel, share truth, and so on. Yes, with this gift comes all kinds of ways we can misuse it. All kinds of ways, we're sinners. We sin with everything. So we'll sin with the internet. We'll sin with social media. But that's no argument against, I think there's a lot of, we have a tendency, again, I think it's particularly men, because we want to be right and we want to be glorious, and we want people to respect us. And so as soon as we think, if I did that and I did it kind of badly, I would look bad. So I'm going to take the moral high ground and tell everybody that I'm getting off of Facebook, right? Well, maybe some people do need to do that, but I think there's a lot of sort of false, I think, you're a coward, right? You need to engage. You need to engage wisely. And again, there are some people that, they're busy doing other good things, and they shouldn't engage on social media. But I think lots of Christians should. One other thought on this is that there's, you said, how do you do it without, getting your life sucked away? Well, you can't do it in a way that you're being disobedient to God in any other way. So, you've got a wife, you've got kids, you've got a job, you've got an employer that you must, there's all kinds of stipulations in place. And if you're engaging on social media in a way that causes you to sin against any of those other obligations that God's laid on you, then you're in sin. Stop it. Repent. But I think, again, there's opportunities there, great opportunities there. A lot of foolishness goes on without any Christians just getting on there and saying, nope, that's wrong. No, that's not true. And so I think there's that. I think there are people that, one of the other things to watch, to keep in mind, is sometimes the thing that you should be thinking about is not just the person that not just the person that's wrong on the internet who needs maybe a correction, but remember that God has created a kind of megaphone such that hundreds and thousands of people are watching and listening. There's all the lurkers. And so sometimes what you're interacting for is not for the person that is wrong. You're probably not going to convince them. But there's a whole bunch of people watching. One of the ways, sorry, I'm kind of going on long, but one of the ways that God taught me this lesson was actually a number of years ago. I was regularly going up to the University of Idaho campus preaching, open air preaching, and one fall in particular, I've told this story a few times, so some of you guys have heard this, but I walked up there. I hadn't gotten out a first sentence of who I was, and this philosophy grad student came up to me and just started rah, rah, cussing me out, yelling, "You're here because you hate us," and rah, 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 and instant crowd, right? And I explained to him, no, I'm here because I love Jesus, and I'm here to, what's your name? I'm not going to tell you my name, and all this kind of stuff, and week after week, on Friday at noon when I went up there, the same guy showed up. And I was like, it's kind of tedious and hard, and I tried to, I'm not here because I hate you. Yes, you are, you hate me, and you are, and the crowd would gather. No, I'm here because of Jesus. He died for our sins, and he rose from the dead, and so on, and kept going. And towards the end of that fall, Doug came out with me one time, and Doug started preaching, and I was asking him some questions and trying to get conversation. Well, he showed up again, same guy, and then another heckler shows up, a young kid who's just started reaming Doug. He's a little 17-year-old kid that just was screaming insults at him, and instantly we probably had the biggest crowd of the fall. 300 or 400 people. Do you remember that?
This is a preaching starter kit.
Yeah. But we went on for about 20 or 30 minutes with, I think, several hundred kids in the square asking Doug and me, what does the Bible teach about this? What do Christians believe about this? What about this? And right after that finished, the first grad student philosopher guy who had come after me every single week all fall came up to me and said, "I'm really sorry about that other kid." My name's Justin. And we went out for coffee. But the thing that I realized is God gave me a gift in that man all fall. Right? And I didn't realize what he was giving me. He was giving us a gift. Hundreds of students hearing the gospel preached. And I don't know if any of them came to the Lord, but I know that all that fall, hundreds of University of Idaho students heard the gospel proclaimed week after week after week because of that one man who hated me. And don't forget that when you're engaging on social media.
A quick tag on with regard to social media. I sometimes wonder, this is a random thought, I sometimes wonder about the person with all the great gifts for social media and blogging who was born in the 1300s. And he would say to his friends or his wife, I just have these strange yearnings. I don't understand.
Pastor Doug, someone asks, is the difference between what you called winsome tartness and sarcasm only a matter of the heart, or do other things come into play?
Other things come into play. There's an objective line that where there's Horatian satire, there's Juvenalian satire, there's scurrilous abuse, there's if you just lose your temper, the Bible talks about fits of rage. Well, that's a work of the flesh. So it's not just if your heart is right, anything goes. So when you're writing, when you're speaking, it's rhetoric is a skill, an art and a skill that has to be learned. You don't have it automatically. You can't say, well, you made fun of it, and so I'm going to make fun of it too. Well, maybe you can't successfully do it, right? Or and then you should go seek out, basically, if you think, well, I might be able to learn how to do this, seek out people that you know how to do it, and ask them, do you think, here's a bit of writing I did, here's something, do you think that there's anything there? And a mentor or instructor can't put in what God left out. But there are a lot of people that have a lot of they've got the native gifts that need to be disciplined and trained and encouraged. So I would say if you're at all interested, make sure that you're living in community, accountability. You're not just a Lone Ranger. There's somewhere on my blog, I think I've got 21. John Frame one time reviewed my book on this, A Serrated Edge. John Frame reviewed the book, and it was a very good review. And as a result, I put together 21 principles for satiric writing, biblical principles. So that'll pop up in the search bar if you look for principles of satire.
Perhaps I should say, not to endorse the guy, but Jordan Peterson succeeds in this.
Yes, he does.
He's absolutely brilliant. And he takes on the liberals, and he won't buy into some of the junk that's being said, and he quotes science and logic, and he gets away with it. And I think that is something of a model that we can all take. We should also pray for Jordan Peterson that he become a Christian. But just as a social success, he's taken on the liberals, especially in the Canadian University, and put them to silence because of the clear statements he makes about things like Black Lives Matter and the pronouns that the university wants to impose on him, and he refuses to use them because he's able to defend himself with some very clear thinking. So what Doug is talking about from a Christian perspective, I think also works socially.
Joe, someone wanted to ask what you meant that our culture is turning to magic for solutions instead of the truth and answer of the gospel. If you could elaborate on the ways that our culture is turning to magic and various forms of that.
Yeah. So when we think of magic, we tend to think of sort of primitive hocus pocus, frog's legs, that kind of fairy tale image of magic. But actually, magic is fundamentally about manipulation. It's the attempt to manipulate and to manipulate reality, to make it bend to what you want. Actually underlying ancient philosophy was very much this worldview of magic. It's a onist system. Peter Jones has talked about that all this conference and in the pre-conference, that if there is essentially only everything that is divine, then you can have ideas of correspondence. Maybe if I use the right word here, we talk about the magic word. You think about the way in which language has played such a critical role in manipulating people to speak lies the whole time. Even this pronoun stuff we just heard about is in the end born out of a magical worldview, that if we use these different words, reality will transform to my word rather than God's word. So that's fundamentally what I mean by the worldview of magic, that says ultimately man can speak the word and he can conform reality to his desire. So it's always been about, magic has always been about manipulation, whether it was manipulation of the gods or manipulation of a person or a circumstance. Everything was about manipulation. That was the way medicine was carried on in the ancient world too, the gods, Asclepius and others. It was a magical worldview. Christianity broke with the politico-magical worldview and said, no, there is a God who is utterly distinct from creation, from the world. Creation is governed by his law and his word. You cannot make reality conform to your word. And I think actually what's going on in culture right now with all of this, think about how words like humanitarian have changed their meaning, words like gay. I refuse to use all of these terms that have been manipulated to create a new meaning. And this is what the philosophers were saying really in the 20th century, was that what the likes of Judith Butler, the American Jewish feminist philosopher, is that if we just change the language, we can change the world. So we need to be very careful about the language we use, that we don't buy into this manipulation of reality that all of a sudden has people speaking as though those things are true and real. Trans, I mean, all of these types of terms, even the word homosexual was invented in the 19th century. We have bought into, if you use the word sodomy, which is the word I tend to use when referring to homosexual behavior, you should see the steam coming out of people's ears. Because, of course, the word sodomy immediately conjures up immoral behavior in people's minds, whereas the term gay, well, that's just about being happy, isn't it? Having a happy life. So, in the end, magic is about the use of words to manipulate reality to try and make it conform to your desire.
It's interesting, the sociologist Mircea Eliade described the era of the 60s as the age of magic. And I thought about that when I watched Doug singing the other night.
Magical is what it is.
But certainly the case can be made that the occult came in the 60s, and many of the leading performers got engaged in the occult. And Aleister Crowley, who was called a Satanist, and really was a leader of this whole movement of the occult, is on the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Heart Club Band cover, and that shows to what extent real magic, real occultic thinking is part of the transformation of our present culture.
I'd like to add just one thing to what Joe just said. I would sum up this, the whole battle that we're engaged in could be summed up as a battle over the dictionary. That's what it is. Who's going to write and publish the dictionary?
And that's part of where the hashtag activism plays right into that project, that program. A question for Toby. If a man has taken responsibility of the fights in his life, as you were discussing in your talk last night, the fights in his life against sin, fighting for his wife, providing, leading in worship in his home, what value do those other manly activities bring? Like you mentioned the hunting, weightlifting, so on and so forth. Or to put it differently, how should we encourage our sons to be doing both things and making sure those priorities are right?
Right. So, yeah, that's a great question. Those activities are given to us by God in order to train us and to train our boys for the great fights. So it's not that hunting is, I was not disparaging hunting. I wasn't disparaging a good war movie. I'm not disparaging contact sports at all. I think we need them. the point I was making in the talk is that sometimes we use them as substitutes. So rather than facing the battle that God has assigned us, we do, we're the weekend warrior, right? When the war that God's called you to is in your home. You have a wife and you have children who need you. But in God's ordering of things, we need trained though. And so little boys need to be taught to, play rugby, get hit, get back up, be tough. Try again, do it again. Wipe the tears off your face, okay, go again, do it again. Here's how you hold a gun, here's how you aim the gun. Shoot it, yep, okay, do it again. So we need all of it, but the point of it is that all of those things are actually practice for the real battle. But if all you're doing is flexing in the mirror, and
For your Instagram profile,
right, yeah, right. But that can be just as effeminate as some man getting his nails done, right? It can be just as effeminate because it's just a show. It's not real. But if it's really practicing to go to battle, then that's what we need it for. That's what it's for. So you go and you practice fighting in all these different ways, and there's all kinds of different, there's manly gardening, and there's all kinds of ways of doing it. Working on your car, do it to the glory of God, but do it recognizing, figuring out this problem with my brakes or with my alternator and getting it fixed and so on. How is God using this to teach me how to lead my wife and my children to Jesus?
I wanted to give you all the opportunity, if you had a question for one of the other speakers, feel free to. I'll give you a moment to think if you wanted to.
I don't have a mic. Couple of smart alecks.
I got a question. Doug, how are you so funny?
There are some who say I'm not. So I was blessed to grow up in a family that had a lot of a very good sense of humor. The family, it was a godly Christian family, and a lot of enjoyment of humor, stories, jokes, plays on words. It was that. But the other thing is, and because of that, I was attracted over the years to writers like P.G. Wodehouse, and I've just done a lot of reading in writers that were gifted at that kind of thing. And those who walk with the wise are wise, as Scripture says, and those who walk with the funny are funny.
All right, I'll give Toby a question. So, social media. I'm not on any. I'm not a coward. It's partly time. I mean, my organization is on it, so I have a public Facebook page, but I'm not personally on it. And so one of the questions I would have for you is, given that not all forms of communication are suitable for accomplishing the same thing, so a smoke signal, for example, is no good for writing poetry. You can communicate certain things via a smoke signal, but it's pretty limited. But you can't write poetry with it.
Some forms of modern poetry,
Probably. Yeah, gas and air.
The proof.
And the same way, television has kind of turned what we used to think of as news into entertainment. So give us a little bit of guidance on perhaps the limitations of what you can communicate in a tweet, for example, and how people can best use social media in the way that is suitable to the medium of communication. Certainly, you would agree that preaching can't be done from social media in the same way that can be done in the pulpit. There's something about the power of preaching. So say something about the value, the limitations of social media.
Yeah, that's really fair. Part of this goes back to me just as I said earlier, I think there's we've just begun, so we're figuring this out. So I think some of this remains to be seen, and I would agree with you. I think there's some big parameters where social media cannot replace Sunday morning worship. It cannot replace the preaching of the word by a real flesh and blood man looking you in the face, looking you in the eyes on Sunday morning. There absolutely are limitations. It's not the same thing as getting a cup of coffee with somebody and having an exchange. So all of those things I think are right. I think at the same time, I think, again, we're figuring it out. There are things, so Jesus says some things though in the Gospels that, you can tweet. Or, that are, he gives, one-line answers and short answers and provocative statements, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you have no life within you, and there you go. And, and so I think, I think we have limitations that are surely there. You're right about, television is, who was it? Neil Postman, amusing ourselves to death. Decades ago was telling us, look at how the medium is shaping us and changing the message. The message is being shaped by this. I think he's right, and so that means every medium is shaping the message in various ways. I think what we've got to figure out, I think, so each of these, so if the word is a sword, and it is, all of these mediums, though, are ways in which we can use our sword effectively. But not all of them are effective for all purposes.
For all people.
And for all
all
people.
gifts.
Yeah, right, and all people, and all gifts. So, and I said this earlier, and I think there are people that are fighting front lines, if you're doing evangelism down the street, if you're involved in doing good work in your family or in your church, if you're, I'm not saying that then therefore, you need to find, 30 more minutes a day and get on. I'm not saying that, but I think sometimes it's a cop out. I don't want to try it out. I don't think, it's too hard, it's too difficult. It's not for everyone, and it's not for everything. But I do think it is a place where the world is gathered. The world is gathered there. It is a marketplace of ideas. If the Apostle Paul were alive today, he would have a Twitter account. He would have a Facebook page. He would be speaking into the world. And I think, one of the things I found with a lot of it too is it's a lot of what I'm finding more and more is it's a place where the best use is not so much maybe direct interaction and argument, though I think sometimes there's some good exchanges, but a lot of times there's just really good sharing of information going on. So I can link to a sermon that you preach or Doug preaches and share it with thousands of people.
That's good.
Yeah, you like that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do that more.
I should do that more. Okay. And then somebody, I think the whole thing with the podcasting thing is a crazy deal, but I'm involved with Cross Politic for the last couple of years, and we have people contacting us from the Middle East and Eastern Europe and Australia and all over the world saying, thanks so much, it's such an encouragement. And what? What? That's well, it's being shared by social media. That's the thing. And so I think it isn't directly social media, but I think that's how they're getting word.
Just another quirky thing to piggyback off that is my son Nate made a movie a few years ago, The River Thief, and that was a very fun experience. But somebody took that movie and translated it into Arabic and put Arabic subtitles through the whole movie and posted it on YouTube. And it's got over 1 million views. The Arabic version has got so you've got this random, there's a way of, social media can get into places that preachers of the gospel can't easily get into. And there are all sorts of subversive ways to utilize it. But there's a world of difference between the guy who has an hours in the day problem and what God's called me to do, and doesn't include that. This is just distracting from my mission on the one hand, which is honorable and right, because it's a body life thing. If the whole body were an eye, where would the hearing be? And another guy who doesn't want to be on social media because if he did that, his boss would find out he was a Christian.
In the minute or so we have left, any final words or anything you didn't get to say in your talks that you'd want to say now? Now's your last chance to go for it.
I'll tweet it later.
There we go. Someone
I'm going to
get-
be looking
get the
for it.
Twitter
I'm going to be
handle-
looking for it.
Someone get the Twitter handle quick for him.
Well, I guess I'd like to say how pleased I am to have been invited to this conference and to have observed the deliberate attempt to translate fundamental Reformed theology into cultural expressions. It's very impressive, and I just want to encourage you all to keep going.
Yes. And I was going to say, let's thank our speakers one more time. But-